My name is Ryan, and I've always been second place in my family. Not because I failed, just because my brother succeeded more. And for that, they overlooked me. But nothing could have prepared me for the ultimate betrayal. While I buried my wife, they were at his promotion party. And this time, I wasn't going to let it slide. I sat in the front row of the funeral hall, gripping the edge of my chair as the priest spoke. His words barely registered. My world had gone silent the moment my wife took her last breath. I kept waiting for my parents to walk in, to sit beside me, to offer even the smallest shred of support. But the doors never opened for them. Instead, they were across town, raising glasses of champagne, celebrating my brother Alex's big promotion. I shouldn't have been surprised. Alex had always been their favorite, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. While I worked hard just to be acknowledged, he walked on water in their eyes. Every achievement of his was met with praise, every failure of mine with disappointment. But I thought, at the very least, there were limits, that there were moments in life where family showed up no matter what. I was wrong. After the service, I sat alone in the emptying hall, my hands clenched into fists. People offered their condolences and left, but my parents' absence spoke louder than any of their words. My father hadn't even returned my calls. My mother had sent a single text, "Ryan, you know how important this night is for Alex. We'll talk later." Talk later? My wife was dead, and they were at a party. Grief twisted into something sharper. Anger. Betrayal. I grabbed my keys, my heart pounding as I made a decision I knew I wouldn't take back. If they weren't going to show up for me, I was going to show up for them. And I wasn't coming quietly. I drove through the city streets, my grip tightening around the steering wheel with every passing mile. My mind replayed the funeral over and over, the empty seats where my parents should have been, the pitying looks from distant relatives who couldn't believe they hadn't shown up. But what burned the most wasn't their absence. It was the reason behind it. They had chosen Alex. Again. As I pulled up outside the venue, I could see the celebration in full swing through the massive glass windows. People in suits clinked glasses, laughter and music spilling into the night. A large banner hung above the entrance. "Congratulations, Alex." My stomach twisted. Just hours ago, I had stood over my wife's casket, saying goodbye forever. And now, here they were. My parents, my brother, my entire family, acting like nothing had happened. Before I walk through those doors and confront them, I want to take a moment to connect with all of you, my incredible viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. I'd love to see how far this story has reached. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The warmth of the room hit me instantly, a sharp contrast to the cold emptiness I'd felt all day. My mother was laughing, a glass of champagne in her hand. My father was in deep conversation with one of Alex's colleagues. And Alex, standing in the center of it all, was basking in the attention like he always did. I walked straight toward them. The first to notice me was my mother. Her smile faltered, her eyes widening in surprise. "Ryan?" she said, as if she hadn't expected to see me tonight, as if she had forgotten why I might be here. The conversation around us slowed, heads turning toward the sudden tension in the room. My father looked up from his drink, his brows knitting together. "What are you doing here?" he asked, as if I was the one crashing their night. I let out a cold laugh. "That's funny. I was about to ask you the same thing." The room fell silent. My mother reached for my arm, but I pulled away. "Ryan, please, let's not do this here." "No," I said, my voice steady, firm. "Let's do this exactly here, because this is where you decided to be today. While I was burying my wife, your daughter-in-law, you were here, drinking, celebrating, pretending she never existed." A murmur spread through the crowd. People exchanged uneasy glances, their smiles disappearing as they realized what was happening. My father sighed, setting his drink down. "Ryan, we talked about this." "No," I cut him off. "You talked. You sent me a text saying Alex's promotion was important. More important than me. More important than her." I turned to Alex, who had been silent this whole time, watching the scene unfold. And you? Did you even care? Or were you too busy basking in the spotlight again? Alex's jaw tightened. Ryan, this isn't the time. I took a step closer, my voice lowering but no less sharp. When exactly was the time, Alex? Because I looked for you at the funeral. I looked for both of you. I turned back to my parents. And you weren't there. You made your choice. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. Not this time. I let the silence hang, let the weight of my words settle over them. Then, with one final glance at the family who had never truly been mine, I turned and walked out the door. And this time I wasn't coming back. The night air hit me like a shock as I stepped outside, my heart still pounding in my chest. The muffled hum of conversation and clinking glasses faded behind me, replaced by the distant sounds of the city. I had come here expecting anger, confrontation, maybe even regret from them, but all I felt now was emptiness. I stood by my car, gripping the door handle, but I couldn't bring myself to leave just yet. Not because I was having second thoughts, I wasn't, but because some part of me, despite everything, still couldn't understand how it had come to this. How my own parents had made it so clear, so undeniable, that I was nothing more than an afterthought to them. Footsteps approached behind me. Ryan. I didn't need to turn to know who it was. My mother. Her voice was soft, hesitant, as if she was afraid I'd disappear if she spoke too loudly. I exhaled slowly, then turned to face her. She stood a few feet away, arms wrapped around herself, eyes glistening under the streetlights. Please, she said, taking a small step closer. Can we just talk? I let out a short, humorless laugh. Now you want to talk? I shook my head. Where was this when I needed you? When I was standing alone at her funeral, waiting for you to walk through those doors. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but I didn't soften. Not this time. Ryan, we didn't... She paused, as if choosing her words carefully. We didn't think it would make a difference. My breath caught. You didn't think it would make a difference? My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. My wife, your daughter-in-law, died, and you didn't think it would make a difference if you were there. She flinched, but I wasn't done. You didn't come. You didn't call. You didn't even ask me how I was holding up. But you had no problem dressing up and celebrating Alex's promotion like it was the most important day in the world. I let out a hollow chuckle. Hell, even the caterer at the funeral showed me more sympathy than you did. Her shoulders shook as she wiped at her face. We were proud of him, Ryan. We wanted to be there for him too. And what about me? I took a step closer, my voice quieter now, but no less firm. Have you ever wanted to be there for me? Silence. She opened her mouth, but before she could answer, the door to the venue swung open again. My father stepped out, his expression unreadable. Behind him, Alex lingered in the doorway, arms crossed. He didn't look guilty. He didn't even look sorry. Just annoyed, like this whole thing was an inconvenience to him. Ryan, my father said, his voice even controlled. This isn't the place for this conversation. I scoffed. You always say that, but somehow there's never a right place, never a right time. I met his gaze, searching for even a flicker of regret. There was none. Alex finally spoke, his tone impatient. Look, I get that you're upset, but do you have to make such a big deal out of this? It's not like Mom and Dad skipped your funeral. The world seemed to freeze. A cold, sharp silence settled between us. I stared at him, barely able to process what he had just said. My mother gasped, covering her mouth. My father turned to Alex, his expression shifting for the first time. Alex, he warned, but it was too late. I let out a breath, slow and controlled, but inside, something in me had finally snapped. You know what, Alex? My voice was eerily calm. You're right. They didn't skip my funeral. But after tonight, they might as well have. I turned back to my parents. My mother was crying openly now, but she didn't reach for me. My father, so composed, so sure of himself, had nothing to say. I nodded to myself, feeling lighter than I had all night. Goodbye, I said, and this time I meant it. Then I got in my car, started the engine and drove away, leaving them behind, where they had always left me. The road stretched endlessly ahead, city lights blurring as I drove through the night. My knuckles were white against the steering wheel, but my breathing had evened out. The weight in my chest was still there, but something else had taken its place. Something unexpected. Relief. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for them. Waiting for their approval. Waiting for them to care. I had spent years standing in Alex's shadow, making excuses for my parents, convincing myself that if I just tried harder, if I just proved myself, they would finally see me. But tonight had shattered that illusion for good. They had made their choice, and now I was making mine. I drove in silence, the hum of the engine the only sound filling the empty space around me. My mind replayed the night's events. The funeral, the empty seats, the cold indifference on my parents' faces, Alex's cruel, dismissive words. The finality of it all settled deep in my bones. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the house loomed dark and silent before me. I sat in the car, gripping the steering wheel, my chest rising and falling in steady breaths. My wife should have been inside, waiting for me. She would have wrapped her arms around me, kissed my cheek, told me I was worth so much more than the way they treated me. But she wasn't here. She was gone. And no confrontation, no words, no amount of anger would ever change that. I exhaled shakily, pressing my forehead against the wheel. The grief that I had pushed down all night came rushing back, raw and suffocating. I had spent the entire day burying her, and now I had buried my family too. But somehow, in all that loss, I had found something else. Freedom. The thought hit me with quiet force. I had always been bound to them by an invisible thread, always reaching for scraps of affection they had no intention of giving. But tonight, I had taken the scissors and cut myself free. I stepped out of the car, the night air cool against my skin. The house was too quiet, too still, the kind of silence that seeps into your bones, making the absence of a loved one feel even heavier. I hesitated at the door, my fingers brushing the handle before finally turning the key. Inside, everything was exactly as I had left it. The framed photos on the walls, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. My chest tightened as I walked through the living room, my eyes landing on the small collection of candles I had lit before leaving for the funeral. They had burned low, tiny flickers of light struggling to stay alive. Just like I had been all these years. I sank onto the couch, rubbing a hand over my face. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it. I already knew who it was. My mother, my father, maybe even Alex. Maybe they had something else to say, some new excuse, some attempt at damage control. It didn't matter. I was done listening. Instead, I reached for my wife's favorite book, the one she used to read on nights when she couldn't sleep. I traced my fingers over the worn edges of the pages before flipping it open to a random passage. I read the words silently, letting them ground me, letting them remind me that there was a world beyond the pain, beyond the betrayal. I wasn't just walking away from them. I was walking towards something else. A life where I wasn't second place. A life where I didn't have to fight for love that should have been given freely. A life where I could grieve, heal, and one day maybe find happiness again. The thought didn't feel as impossible as it had a few hours ago. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing after them. I was moving forward. And this time, I wasn't looking back. At its core, this story isn't just about betrayal, it's about self-worth. It's about realizing that sometimes the love and validation we chase from others will never come, no matter how much we deserve it. It's about knowing when to stop waiting, when to walk away, and when to choose ourselves. Family should be a source of support, not a weight that drags us down. And while cutting ties is never easy, sometimes it's necessary to find true peace. Now, I want to hear from you. What do you think about this story? Drop a 2 in the comments if you liked it, or a 7 if you didn't. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Mr.HeartVibes for more powerful stories like this. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to share more with you soon.